Welcome to Session Sunday. Hi guys, it's Jack Edwards, and in today's video we're going to be looking at receiving in between the lines. But before we get into this week's video, make sure to leave us a like and subscribe, and if you missed last week's video, click on the link above. Okay, so moving into the first part of this week's session, we're focusing on receiving in between the lines to then attack, as in like a 3v2 scenario, sorry. So what it's going to be in terms of setup and equipment for this week, in terms of players, we're going to have 16 players in total, 15 outfield players plus a goalkeeper. If you have less players, that's fine, we can just adapt the session for less players. In terms of equipment, we're looking at balls, bibs and cones throughout, and then obviously if you've got to use small-sided goals, you can then use poles instead if you don't have small-sided goals. So in terms of the players, okay, obviously if you have 12 players, we'll just take players out to certain areas each time. If you have more players, you can just add more players in. In terms of the setup for this part of the session, okay, in terms of depth, so from goal line to the defenders here are going to be 20 yards, okay, and then what we're going to have is just a small gap of about 5 yards from the defenders to this box here and where the players are. This area then is going to be 10 yards, okay, so in total so far you're probably looking about 35 yards to here, and then this area in here is going to be 15 yards, okay, so you're looking for your depth around 50 yards of depth, okay, you can adapt that again for more and less players. In terms of the width, we're looking around 40 to 45 yards, 20 yards in here, so it's we're trying to spread these players out as well to create a bit of space without them being too tight. 20 yards in here with 10 yards either side. Again, you can increase that and decrease that depending on the numbers that you have and maybe with the age group that you're working with. So this box in the middle will just be 10 by 10. In terms of how we split the players up, so there's going to be six greens, and then we're going to have 9 blues who are going to be the attackers, okay? So the aim for the blues is when the coach plays in, they're looking to manoeuvre the ball into this middle player, so this player receiving in between the lines, so creating space for them. So can we use this player in the central area to combine as well, okay? Use the wide players, find the gaps, so, and then any 4 of these players can play into this player. As soon as they play in, we're then getting our support from the attackers in here, okay? So can this player drive centrally, entice the defenders to come in, set it out and then look to finish, or can it be they might receive in here, okay, and they take it on the outside, okay, then can we look to get runners, maybe going across the defence, someone stretching it, okay, to pull a player out, and then a player can make that run inside the defender to go in and score. So it's moving that ball quickly, okay, setting the tempo high, our awareness, our decision making, and then our concentration. We want to try and use this central player in here as a player to bounce passes off, okay, and create angles to receive and also angles to create space. So if this player pulls out into space here, it might entice one of these 4 defenders, okay, the greens, to come in and try and defend them, which might leave a gap in behind. So if they jump out of the space in there and we're going to play in there and it sets back, then we can look to play into the middle player. As soon as that ball goes in, we're looking for the attackers, okay, to get up quickly, okay, and support the attack, so then we can get into that final third and then score. And in a 3v2 scenario, we should be scoring and using, obviously, our overload in there, stretching the centre-backs, okay, making it difficult for them and attacking the centre of the pitch. If you wanted to change things over, you could have these 4 players swapping over at all times. So you could have greens and maybe reds in here, and they could swap over every so often. You might want to swap some of your attackers over with players in here as well. Your defenders can swap over, depending on what players that you have there and then. But if you want to try and work on, you know, having your wingers and your wide players in this area, a striker or an attacking midfielder in this area here, and then again you can have your fullbacks, your midfielders in this area, and work on your defensive compactness as well. So as well as receiving in between the lines, you can work on the opposite side of the ball as well, with staying compact and preventing passes through the lines. We will now move into our first animation before moving on to part 2 of this week's session. Now moving into part 2 of this week's session, we're now focusing on a possession-based small-sided game, which again is focusing on receiving in between the lines. So how we're going to set up this part of the session, there's quite a lot of depth, okay, but the players are spread out. If you want to do as well as a progression, you can then look to make it a little bit smaller, but cut out the areas, okay, so players are able to roam a little bit more freely if you want to as a progression. So what we're going to have is the final third here is 20 yards, okay, the middle area here is 20 yards, in this area here 20 yards again, and then another 10 yards, so 60 yards a total depth. Again, for more or less players, you can adapt that, okay. If you want to make it a little bit smaller, you can. If it starts off and you think it's a little bit too big, make it a little bit smaller. In terms of width, we're going to go 40 yards of width. 20 yards central, 10 yards either side. So we're going to split it, okay? So there's going to be 6 greens, and then we're going to have 7 blues with 2 yellows as floaters. So when the greens win it back, they can have the yellows in possession as well, which would give them an overload. So the players are locked in. The ball can start with the goalkeeper or with the coach playing into the blues. So you're going to look to play into the centre-backs, okay? We're looking to manoeuvre the ball, try and use the wide players, okay? So they're trying to play through every single area though, so they've got to play through. So receiving in between the lines of midfield here, into that midfield area, playing forward then, okay, and then playing into the forwards. If you wanted to as well, you can maybe have an end zone or a small-sided goal, so once the players receive it in here, excuse me, they can then attack. But what we're doing is focusing on possession. So as soon as the ball gets into these players, we're working our way back up. So we're trying to use the wide players in possession, okay, to stretch the pitch and then give something for the greens to think about. As soon as his players touch the ball in here, they can go forward at any point. He might not have options to turn and play forward, but he could play to the wide player, who then plays in, okay. And we're constantly looking for the wide players to be up and down. So try and use your fullbacks, okay, wingers if you don't have them with you, available, sorry, for the session. Again, it's a 2v2 in here now, so we're encouraging the movement. So with it being 1 versus 2 in there, it's going to be difficult for this player. So they're going to have to bounce passes, okay, and hope and use the wide players to combine to then get an overload to entice the greens to go over towards the full-backs, which might leave some space centrally. Now with our 2v2, again, use the wide players to combine. Once these players have received the ball, they're looking to play forward quickly into one of these 2 players. So the 2 in here are trying to prevent passes into this player, as well as trying to win it back. They're trying to prevent those passes. So the pass into these players here, if you wanted to, could come from the fullbacks. But at first, we're going to say it's got to come from the central players, okay, to make it a little bit more difficult. In this area here, where there's an underload, it can be from the fullbacks, but it has to go into this player first. So they have to touch it. So these players look to combine, okay, try and entice the greens to go in. Okay, over towards the fullback again. When it goes across, entice them to go across into wide areas. So when we get it back, we can play forward. Once we play in here, these players can then look to combine and then play back into the central area. Okay, one of these players has to touch it before it goes into the fullback. Then we're trying to work our way across again. So it could be played across, into the yellows, back into this player here, and back to the start. So again, we're focusing on our movement to receive the ball. Okay, good first touch, the tempo of our play, how we move the ball, okay, our decision making, our concentration, the awareness of the space and the players that are around us. And then once we say, as a progression, you can then maybe remove the middle zones, okay, and they're just looking to maintain possession, but you're still looking to get that height, width and depth in terms of the greens when you win it back. So let's say a ball goes in here, looks to play out to the fullback, they look to attack the goal quickly, okay, so then the blues can look to recover. Depending on where the ball is, these players, it might be pointless them trying to get back, but still look to win it back, okay? So look to react positively to get back in there. The greens come in, okay, they look to get in and then score. And after a certain amount of time, you might look to swap the teams over if you wanted to as well. And like I say, take out the zones as a progression. We will now move into our next animation before moving on to the final part of this week's session. Okay, so moving into the final part of this week's session, we're now looking to receive in between the lines, to attack. So we're looking to play into one of our front 3, who are looking to receive the ball in behind the midfield, in front of the centre-backs, and then attacking a 4v2 scenario. Again, you might want to look to make it a 3 versus 2 scenario as well if you wanted to, or a 4 versus 3. In terms of the setup, in terms of the depth, in here we're going to have 20 to 25 yards, depends again on how many players you've got and the space of first. Going to have 20 yards in here, 10 yards in here, okay? This is the area where you want a bit more room, okay? So between 20 and 25 again. For the whole area in here with the players, having about 5 yards of depth for these boxes in here. So they have got an overload, okay? We've got 2 players staying in, but also these players can't go in and tackle these players, so they're unopposed. They can put pressure on and block passes, but they can't tackle them. So what we're trying to do is stretch the pitch to then entice one of these players to go in to then look to play forward. In terms of width, 40 yards, 20 yards in the central area here for this player, 10 yards either side. So again, if you wanted to change it up, what you could do is have a player in here instead, okay, who can come across into there. Okay, so instead of when the ball goes in here, you're looking for a player, you could look for a player to recover to make a 4v3. You could have one player staying in here, 3v3 in there, and then when it goes into there, it's a 4 versus 3 scenario, which means that these players are going to move it quickly. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll look at it going like that, and then we can look at it first, going 4v2 to get some positive attacks, and then once the players are used to it, put that player in there. Okay, so the ball will start with the coach, plays into one of these players in here. They're looking to manoeuvre the ball, okay, so the centre-backs can pass to each other as well, okay, play the ball in, try and create that space to play into one of these players. So the 3 players in here, plus that player in behind, or if they're in there, are looking to stop one of these 3 players getting the ball. So for us, that movement to receive, okay, so can a player move to create space for one of these players to receive it? As soon as we've done that, attack quickly. So where's our support runs? Okay, players on the outside. So we're getting our height, width and depth. Might get a player spinning off into space, which creates space for a player coming from the wide areas to move in and then score. If the Greens win it back at any point, they're looking to attack this goal here. Okay, so if you have another goalkeeper, brilliant. You can just have a small-sided goal. They have to get the ball into the final third and then look to score. So for the Blues, it's can you recover quickly and defend the goal. So again, the main things we're focusing on is that decision-making, the awareness, the movement to create space, a positive first touch, the ability to play first time as well. And these players in here always being on the move. Okay, so when a ball comes back in and the player creates the space, can we play forward? So that's why maybe we want that 4 in there at the start, okay, to make it more difficult to play through. But obviously for then it's a more difficult recovery one. But if you can win the ball higher, you're saying to the Greens, if you can win the ball in this area here, okay, so when players turn, okay, you can afford for somebody to go press it because you've got that extra player covering the space and then they can go and score. Again, though, if you wanted to and have one player in there screening passes, it just means these 3 players got to work a little bit harder and they've got to prevent these players getting the ball. So when this ball comes into here, can you stop them moving forward? If it goes back, prevent the space. Okay, so you step up, but prevent that ball going in there. So what you can say to the players is it has to be on the floor or below head height, just so when the ball comes in here, they're not just clipping it over at first. But again, if you have more players, you might have more players in this area here, which makes it more difficult. You might add more players into there. And again, if you have a goalkeeper, even better, because then players on at both ends can look to score through a goalkeeper. So for the Blues, move that ball in between the lines, so having that confidence to receive it. Okay, when we get it, can we look to combine? To get in behind, okay, so use the overload quickly to score. So when we're attacking in there, first thought is to go forward, okay? Is it a pass? Is it a dribble? But attack the space quickly. We will now move into our final animation before concluding this week's session. Thanks for watching this week's video. Don't forget to head over to our website where you can sign up to view all of our exclusive content. And we'll see you next week for another Session Sunday.